Hey guys, Bart here, coming to you from TST Industries in Florida. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing our new axle slider crash protectors for a couple different mini bikes. All right, so these sliders will fit universally on front and rear axles of the Honda Grom, years 2013 and up, and also the Kawasaki Z125. This may fit other mini bikes, but we haven't found those applications yet. Now, these are manufactured using CNC machinery out of billet aluminum and then hard anodized for a nice long-lasting durable finish. And we have a slider portion that screws on. It's meant to be a consumable item. In the event of a crash, this will get chewed up and you get a replacement. These are made of Delrin plastic. They absorb the impact, they will give during the slide, and hopefully not eat into the aluminum portion. In the event they do, they're not that expensive. You can just replace one side and be good to go. They're very simple to install. You basically disassemble that. You place this under the washer and axle nut or axle head on either front or rear of your mini bike, and bolt it all together, torque it to spec, and then screw the Delrin portion on, torque that on, and you're good to go. As I said, this installation is pretty simple. Let's get started. I'll show you guys how to do it. So at the moment, we are manufacturing these in a couple different colors. As you can see here, we have black, silver, and red anodized. On this particular bike, we've already chosen some red anodized pieces to go together with the nice red brake accents. So we will be choosing the red pieces for the axles. I'm gonna split them apart, and now I'm gonna perform the disassembly of the axle from the rear. Now I have this bike hoisted up on our paddock stand, and what I'm gonna do now is put something underneath the wheel so that when I remove the axle, it doesn't just drop and get all out of place. This will make this whole process vastly less difficult. What I'm using here is a socket. You guys can use a 2x4 or whatever will work for you. All right, so on the Honda Grom, we have a 19mm socket on the nut side, and then a 14mm socket on the axle side. So I'm gonna hold the axle from one side with one wrench and undo my nut. As the nut comes off, there's a washer underneath, that will come off. And now I'll be able to take the axle out. As I take the axle out, I'm going to make sure to lower the wheel gently onto my support. And now it'll stay in place. All right, so the axle also has a washer. The washer stays in place. We will slip one of our protector bosses onto the axle with the threaded portion towards the outside. And now we will fit that through the swing arm and back into the wheel. These get a little finicky on these bikes, so you have to make sure when you're mounting it all back together, you get it all aligned properly and get your chain adjuster in the right place. Otherwise, this will be more difficult. It's looking like it's coming together pretty good for me here. I just need to get it through the rear brake caliper holder. I'm gonna go grab a rubber mallet. As you can see, I knocked out one of these adjusters, so that will need to go back in. And it'll need to get realigned with the axle. Gently tap it in. and we place it in its position. We can insert one of our pieces over the axle, get that washer back over the axle, and start threading our nut back over the axle. Now you don't want to snug this up too much just yet. You have to make sure that it's all fitting properly. Give yourself some wiggle room for adjustment. Now what I'd like to do is loosen this up on both sides using a 10mm and a 12mm wrench. I'm going to use a box wrench on the 10mm. 10mm unlocks the 12. Now that will enable me to push this forward. I'm going to do the same procedure on the left side of the bike. And the reason I did this is because once you loosen the axle, your spacing due to the adjuster's position gets out of whack. So we'll need to redo all that. All right. So now I'm going to use a 14 on the left, 19 on the right, and get them a little bit more snug. Now they're not moving around. I'll get my adjusters back in place. Now you guys are seeing this on the right side of the bike. I'm basically doing the same thing on the left. Okay, at this point, we will need to tighten up the 12mm nuts on the adjuster in such a way that will make the rear axle sit equidistant, or make the axis of the axle parallel with the axis of the swing arm pivot. So that is done by looking at the graduation marks on your adjuster in the window of the swing arm and making sure that you are on the same line on both sides. And I've done that here. What I'd like to do now is torque the rear axle to the appropriate torque spec, which on the Grom is 44 foot-pounds in the rear. So I'm going to adjust my torque wrench to 44 foot-pounds. And I'm going to go ahead and torque this. Okay. All right, so let's now adjust the chain. Now that our axle is completely torqued, we can perform our final adjustment. Again, judging from the graduation marks on the side, turning these nuts clockwise will pull the axle further back and cause our chain to tighten up. Now for proper chain tension, I encourage you to look in your owner's manual or shop manual for your particular bike. We are demonstrating this particular install on a Honda Grom. This will vary a little bit on the Z125. So just follow the chain adjustment procedure in the book that came with your bike. Now what I'm going to do is lock down on my adjuster. Make sure that this 10mm nut is all the way up against the 12mm nut and jamming it in place. So you hold the 12mm and you turn the 10mm, and that puts pressure against the two surfaces and enables them to not spin off. Again, repeat the procedure on this side. It's exactly the same for both sides. All right, the last thing left to do here is to get our Delrin sliders into the bosses that accept them, spin them on by hand, and we are going to torque them afterwards. And get both sides in. And for this procedure, we will need a 15mm socket on a torque wrench. All right, so we are gonna set our torque to 10 foot-pounds. We're going to torque these progressively. Now remember, these are made of Delrin. If you over torque them, this can happen. You see the nut portion of this slider inside. We had a customer that over torqued this and basically spun the tool around the Delrin nut head, and that will basically render this part unable to be properly installed or taken off. So please follow these torque specs. Now I'm gonna go up to 16 foot-pounds and finish torquing it. Now with 16 foot-pounds of torque on this, it has enough friction between the threads of the Delrin piece and the aluminum piece that will lock it in place and prevent it from spinning off during riding vibration. If you want to be safer than that, then I suggest that maybe you can use a little bit of black silicone on the threads, and that will help the threads bind against each other a little bit more. Now what I did on this side was basically repeat the procedure on this side. First I torqued it to 10 foot-pounds of torque, and then I went up to 16 foot-pounds of torque, and now the installation of the rear is complete. One thing I want to mention for you guys watching this video, we are showing the procedure for the installation of the rear and the front. These do come in sets of 2, so when you get 2, you get either rear or front. I recommend buying 2 sets to hook up both sides, both front and rear of the bike, to further protect your investment. All right, so we're gonna break here now and jump over to the front. All right, the procedure for installing these sliders on the front axle is much simpler because we don't have to mess with any chain adjusters. So let's get the axle removed and the wheel down. Again, 14mm on one side and 19 on the other. As you can tell, I'm not using any device to hold the wheel up here because once it comes down, I don't have to mess with any replacement of the chain or brake carrier or anything. It's much simpler to just take down and replace on the way back in. We're also dealing with only one brake caliper. That's a big plus too. All right. One thing that dropped out was my wheel spacer, my bearing spacer. I'm going to put that back in, and that is ready for reassembly. The front of this bike, we don't have any washers on the axle. So once the axle's out and all our components are ready to be put back on the bike, we're going to take one of the slider bosses and insert the axle through it, making sure that the threaded portion is to the outside. I'm gonna insert the axle through the fork leg, making sure that the axle doesn't protrude past the end of the fork leg. And make sure that both my spacers, wheel spacers, are in position, and I'm gonna begin aligning my brake disc inside the caliper, inside the brake pads. This is very crucial. The brakes are your lifeline on a motorcycle. Make sure that they are engaged properly. And after that, I'm going to make sure, as I'm putting this wheel in, the spacers are in their right position and aligned with the holes for the axle to pass through. Once you do that properly, this is really a snap. As you can see, I just pushed it through by hand. No mallet necessary. And I have my axle protruding through the other side of the bike now. I'm going to do the same thing. Insert this over the axle onto the fork leg and cap it off with the nut that came off the axle. Got my 19mm socket. I'm gonna get the nut seated. All right, on this side, I'm gonna get my 14mm around this nut. And my 19mm on the other side. I'm gonna snug this up. Change over to my torque wrench. On this particular bike, we will be using 40 foot-pounds of torque for the front. So we can do that now. All right. And again, one last thing to do is to get these medallion sliders into the bosses and torque them down. One side down, the other side in process. All right, now I'm going to reset my torque wrench to 10 foot-pounds. Grab a 15mm socket. And get this torque down. Go up to 16. All right. Back down to 10. The opposite side. And up to 16 again. And this will be the last part of this procedure. And there you have it. That's pretty much it for this procedure. Just want to mention that, like I said in the beginning of this video, these sliders fit both the Honda Grom, both generations of Honda Grom, and also the Kawasaki Z125. On the Z125, the fasteners for the axles are going to be slightly different size. You're going to use a 14mm and a 17mm socket, and also the torque spec for the axle is going to be a little bit different. You're going with 47 foot-pounds front and back. All right, so those are going to be the differences for applying these sliders onto the Z125. Besides that, I'm pretty much done here. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and consider subscribing to our channel. If you have any comments, questions, anything you want to say, please place that below in the comment feed. And thank you for watching. We'll see you guys next time.